Good morning, honorable members. It has just gone past 8 o'clock. It's actually 1 minute past 8. We are meeting as the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for purposes of looking into the annual report, which also has the Auditor General report for the Department of the Premier or .p. Now, before we are going to do that, I just want to indicate to members that the meeting is a virtual meeting and it's held in terms of the standing rules of order that are also applicable to virtual meeting of the provincial legislature. Now, procedural officer, I just want to check, are there any apologies?
Chairperson, good morning, members. No apologies, Chairperson.
Okay, so in the absence of apologies, the first part, we normally deal with the briefing from the Office of the Auditor General. And thereafter, and the meeting itself, where we are going to be having the briefing from the Office of the Auditor General of South Africa, will be an in-committee meeting, therefore a confidential meeting, meaning that no members of the public as well as the media are allowed to the meeting. And then they will only be allowed after we have finished the briefing with the Auditor General, when we are actually meeting together with the Department of the Premier. Now, can I get an indication, procedural officer, whether are members of the Auditor General already with us?
Chairperson is the Auditor General, the members of the Auditor General, and I believe the Audit Committee is present, Chairperson.
Yes, yeah. Also, together with the, you will also be joined by the Audit Committee of the Department of the Premier as well. So we'll get a briefing from the Auditor General, and also get a briefing from the audit committee. If I may then hand over to the Auditor General.
What we achieved, our 88% of our performance targets for 1920, and generally good progress. I also think on the spending, we improved from 96.9% in 2018-19 to 98.6% in 1920. And that despite even the pressure that was on us. Obviously, if we go back a year, we were in the sort of last stages of the financial year, obviously starting to plan for the COVID-19 or our COVID-19 response, and of course, even right at the very end, we were all obviously faced with the lockdown. So that also put pressure on us. But despite all of those, I think we still managed to achieve a good result, and I must thank the team for that. Chair, I'm not sure if the DG wants to add anything, and then we're happy to hand over for questions.
Thanks very much, Honorable Premier. DG.
Thank you, Chairperson. Also, good morning to the Premier and all the members. I think Premier's covered all the stuff. Just to say, I think internally from ourselves, we take this process very serious. I mean, we are serious about upping the game as it relates to governance. You can see even in our annual report, particularly under Part C, that there's been some governance improvements over the period, and we will do what we need to do to make sure, you know, that we run a clean ship, and obviously that we provide value for money to the citizens. So we've got a committed team in this department, able senior management team in the respective areas, and as Premier has indicated, we've got our program managers on the line to respond to whatever questions you have. So, Chair, we are ready to proceed from our side. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, DG. Honorable members, now I'm going to give an opportunity to you. We are first going to deal with Section C of the report from the Department of the Premier, and that report starts from 111 and then it goes up until 124. Can I get an indication of members who want to speak? I see the hand of Honorable Mackenzie, Honorable Dagmore, Honorable America. Can we go in that order? Sorry, Honorable Doug, Honorable Ngondo. Honorable Doug Mo, is your hand up?
Yes, it is, Chairperson. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Okay, can we go in that order? Honorable Mackenzie was first.
Sorry, Chair, but by accident, I left my book on the keyboard. Apologies for that.
Oh, you are saying, oh, your hand was not up?
It was by accident. Apologize.
Oh, okay. Honorable Doug Moore, Honorable America, and Honorable Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. No, I just would advise Member Mackenzie just to control his book, because if it hits the raise your hand button too often, I think it's going to be difficult for him. But thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer to page 113, the whole issue of the governance committee members, and particularly the issue regarding the attendance at quarterly meetings. Now, we know the DDG, Mr. Buter, to be a very diligent and disciplined DDG. So what I'm quite surprised about is the fact that it appears that the DDG only attended one out of these 4 governance committee meetings. So I just wanted to check if there was an explanation for this. Obviously, given the content of these meetings, we would need to have the DDG legal services in these meetings. So I just wanted to ask whether there was any explanation for that. Chairperson, I do also have a question on 114 and also 126, but should we just ask one question and then come back for a second?
No. Ask all your question on section, on part C.
On C, on governance.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and then just in regard to the second question, there's reference made to key risks considered and addressed during the year, and the one risk bullet refers to inadequate financial resources, and I'm just wondering if that should not rather be a reference to the difficulties or the inability from the side of the department to work with diminishing or less funds, as opposed to inadequate financial resources. I mean, we do see on page 120 that there was actually an under expenditure, and even though that under expenditure is reported due to staff exits, so a risk as identified is inadequate financial resources, and yet we have the issues of under expenditure. So if the department could just tell us exactly what do they want, is there a bigger budget that they're asking for? Are there things that they cannot currently do because of the current budget? So if that risk could just be explained much more clearly, if it is a risk, what are the things that the department would like to do that they cannot do because of the what they refer to as inadequate financial resources? And then on the issues of the portfolio committee, and I know that this report covers the period literally just up to the beginning of the lockdown and the country and the province's response to the pandemic, but the issues of the Western Cape safety plan has been a constant issue that the portfolio committee has been raising. The fact that although the plan has been published, we have never been given concrete implementation plans with dates and people responsible, because the broad plan simply says that this MEC is responsible for that and this MEC is responsible for that, but it doesn't then go into actual detail. So for me, that is potentially even becomes a risk issue, because this department plays an coordinating role in one of the key lead strategies, but we still, as a and I'm talking as a portfolio committee, but I think it is relevant to, the governance issue, because it surely is the responsibility of the department to give us actual detail implementation plans regarding the provincial safety plan, which I can understand has been impacted by the pandemic. But the key issue there is the need for much more detail. And then, also under the risk factors, which I note is not specifically referred to there, possibly we could just get an update from the DG or the Premier himself as to where we are in regard to the fact that from our perspective, there's a clear risk in that although our provincial constitution makes the appointment of the environmental commissioner obligatory, so many years on, we still don't have, and it appears to me, and maybe the Auditor General has got a response to that as well, in terms of compliance at a governance level. Yeah, we have the highest law in the province, the provincial constitution, which says that there shall be an environmental commissioner, and we still do not have one. I know that there has been the publication of a First Amendment bill for the provincial constitution, but does the department not think that this is actually a risk, the fact of non-compliance in regard to the implementation of the environmental commissioner? And then, Chair, just on page 126, I'm concerned that in regard to broad-based Black economic empowerment, there's reference to the development of an preferential procurement policy. And what we need to know, because it's referred to as an economic procurement policy. Those are actually the words used here. Now, what is the implication for this in terms of the preferential procurement policy, which is in fact a law of our country? So the department here is referring to something simply as an economic procurement policy, whereas the law of South Africa actually talks about a preferential procurement policy. So does this, could we have a copy of this economic procurement policy? Maybe it has been provided, and if it has, I apologize for that. But we did not given any details of this economic procurement policy, and the governance risk for me is that there appears to be a non-alignment with the law of this country. And the other issue which I think concerns us is that the majority party in the province talks about a policy which implies that race does not exist, and we even saw recently MEC Mayor saying that it's discriminatory to specifically allocate COVID help to Black farmers. Now, this preferential procurement policy specifically talks to the need to benefit historically disadvantaged individuals and companies. Yet we have the fact that the governing party says that race does not matter. So we're just worried that this delay or the failure to grasp the actual preferential procurement policy and refer to an economic procurement policy is actually undermining the intended objectives of national legislation. Then finally, in the page 171, the report of the AG, there's with reference to note 16.1 in the financial statements. I think we did in the briefing earlier. Yes.
We are only dealing with section C.
Okay, sorry, I moved over to 171. Apologies for that. We'll get back to that when we get to E. Thank you.
So, Honorable America.
Hi, thank you, Chair, and good morning to you and the rest of the participants on the panel. Let me congratulate the department, the Premier and the DG and his team for the 5th consecutive clean audit. It's quite a mean feat. Congratulations for your hard work. I've got 2 questions with regard to that particular section, Chair, and the one being is that there's a well-developed policy around whistleblowers and how, if it is a bona fide disclosure in terms of the Disclosures Act, and how that process is dealt with, and if it's a bona fide disclosure, the necessary process will be followed, and the necessary disciplinary steps will be taken where it is applicable. So that is well established and is laudable, but we also know that in instances where there may not be a non-bona fide disclosure in terms of the Protected Disclosures Act, and one would assume in that instance, when the necessary investigations is being done, that if it is to be determined that a disclosure from a particular whistleblower is done with the intent to impact negatively on a person who's being sort of implicated, whether that non-bona fide disclosure would have malicious intent, whether similar disciplinary processes are being taken or would be taken, or is established to discourage people from maligning individuals and for nefarious reasons pretend to be a bona fide whistleblower. So one question, Chair. And then the second question, Chair, is that again, the policy around disclosure of gifts and is well sort of documented, and it is stated that any gifts above 350 Rand need to be considered prior to obtaining the requisite permission to accept such a gift. So the question I would like to ask, Chair, is that should a gift under 350 Rand, is that to be disclosed as well? And is that particular gift need to be recorded in the gift registry? It is not very clear. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable America. Honorable Ngondo.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you and compliments of the new season to the Premier, the DG and his team, and all the best for 2021. Chair, let me, I think my first just to commend the department having a zero corruption and fraud, I think a report that I think is good and must be applauded from the Premier's office and the team. My question then, Chair, is on page 117 on the health and safety. I just want to understand first that does the department have an OHS expert or practitioner as a unit in the department, or how is this particular function sort of institutionalized within the department? I see that there are reps, as it's indicated there, and if also an indication can be given of the profile or the composition of these reps from which stakeholders of the department. That's my first question, Chair. And then can I just get an explanation about what is the meaning in page 120? There's an indication of the staff exits, and I must say, when one looks at it's almost more than I think it's almost 80% of all the programs where there's been staff exits, and it says is due to the shift from CAPEX to OPEX, blah, blah, blah. So if that can be simplified for a lay person like myself, what does that mean? Then coming to page 126, just wanted to add on what Member Doug Moore had asked. I'm interested to understand, I think, on this preferential procurement policy and its interpretation, I think, in terms of the notes under, I think, the column on discussion, if just some clarity so that a person does not make, their own understanding of this. Under 1.2 there, the development and implementation of a broader economic transformation policy that has been approved. If maybe that can be explained, and what are the principles that underpin, or what's the meaning of the broader economic transformation policy, of the province? I would be very much interested to understand that. In particular, one of the things that I've heard also since the Premier took office, I think in his speeches, I want to understand how does the concept of inclusive growth gets to be interpreted in terms of this particular, in this specific policy. And in that regard, the specifics of the vulnerable groups, in terms of inclusivity, but also when one talks about promoting private sector procurement, what does that mean? Considering that we know, and the statistics, I think, from Stats SA's reports and other economic information, you would understand how our market, is currently very much skewed in terms of its diversity with its historical understanding, of course. And I'm relating here to the level at which, when you talk about promoting private sector procurement, one would want to understand the role and the participation of your SMMEs, in particular Black private companies, which to date in terms of participation, are very minimal if you were to look at the different sectors of the economy of the province. But my last one, Chair, in that space also, in that same page, is that I would like to understand, in as far as the two elements that are mentioned there, where there is not applicable, what does that mean? The developing criteria for entering into partnerships with the private sector, juxtaposing that with what is written in 1.2. What would be the reason to say such is not applicable, to sort of develop criteria in terms of partnership with private sector? But also, if you talk about the criteria of awarding of incentive grants and investment schemes in support of BE, I'm also wanting to understand why would that be not applicable in this context under the BBE intervention or alignment of the province to the BBE Act. Perhaps the department can shed light on why such is viewed as not applicable in the context of the province. So those are my questions, Chair, for this section. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Honorable Keko.
Thanks, Chair. No, mine would be very brief. Is on page 141. There the table 3.4.4, which
Honorable
talks to.
Keko,
Yes.
we are dealing with section C at the present moment.
All right.
Now, 1.4.1.4, you are at?
141.
See, 141 is part D.
All right.
Which
No, it's fine.
Human resources.
Yeah, that's
that was dealt with by the standing committee.
All right. No, it's fine then.
With us, we are only dealing with C and E.
Okay. No problem.
No problem.
Sure.
Thanks. Premier or DDG, can we get the response on the questions that we asked?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll start, and thank you very much to the honourable members for the questions. I think, first of all, I'll see if someone else wants to add to it, but from Honourable Dugmore's questions, the ones that I will deal with are, first of all, the one on the Environmental Commission and, of course, the one on policy. So the Environmental Commissioner, I mean, as far as I know, the honourable member raises it as a risk. And as far as I know, it hasn't up until today, even during the ANC's time of running this government, as well as ours, as a risk. And there is a process in place, which he also mentioned, to say that, we're looking at an amendment bill. This has been in place, in actual fact, in the previous term, and again has been reintroduced in this term to deal with the constitutional matter of an environmental commissioner. And of course, that will be dealt with by the legislature. The second point on the policy, and of course, we're dealing with an annual report and an audit outcomes, etc., governance reporting on this government in a period which preceded the policy that the Honourable Dugmore and the Honourable Nkondlo are speaking about, because the new policy from the DA, which says we mustn't use race as the proxy, we must actually use disadvantage as the proxy, we must look at inclusivity, redress, targeting disadvantage, because the problem with this policy is that if you only use race as the proxy, and we've seen 25 years into democracy already that it is not actually making a difference. But I don't think that this policy is, it's not the right place to have a discussion on this policy. And this policy only accepted by the Democratic Alliance in September of this year is outside of the report that we've got here. And of course, this report is reporting on existing regulation and legislation that exists. So I think that deals with those two. And I think the rest of, I'll hand back to the DG now, who can deal with the technical questions. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you, Premier. Also, thanks to all the members for the questions. Obviously, Chair, some of the questions will be responded to by the team, and I mean, I'm going to try and deal with some of them. The questions by member Dugmore, obviously the issue around inadequate financial resources, it is exactly that. It's not referring to our ability or our inability to work with less funds. In fact, there's been many documents that's been outlined over the last year expressing the whole issue around inadequate financial resources, both for the country as well as for provinces. So, in fact, if you go through our annual report, Chair, you will note that with the finite resources that's been coming to this department, we've been able to actually redirect some of our key activities and also focusing on some of the key deliverables that we had to do. And I'm just going to mention two issues, because Member Dugmore also asked, are there examples where we believe that we've received or that are inadequate financial resources? And it's not an issue of receiving inadequate financial resources from the Treasury. It is just an issue around the fiscal envelope that has shrunk over time. I mean, in our report, Chair, we write a lot around the aging ICT infrastructure, particularly within your bigger departments. I'm sure if you go through our annual financial statements and look at some of those areas, particularly where the Auditor General were looking for some governance control, the aging infrastructure in some of the major departments have been raised. And in fact, we've highlighted this during our intake sessions to PT. So that's a particular area, that we're responsible for as the department of the Premier, that we could not adequately respond to, because obviously we had to make some trade-offs. And then, Chair, there's a general constraint around inadequate financial resources just to fund our structure. I mean, if you look at some of the positions that we've got in the department, some posts we can simply not proceed with because of the fact that we do not have the money, or alternatively, we had to make key trade-offs between, and I think Member Nkondlo raised the issue around shifting our budget spend from operating expenditure, or OPEX as we call it, to more CAPEX. So it's shifting from operational expenditure to capital expenditure. So the issue or the risk of inadequate financial resources is a definite risk. It's also on the provincial risk, and many departments would raise the issue around not having adequate financial resources in place. Chair, I think our ability to work with these finite resources have been demonstrated by, I think, the result that we've received, particularly from the Auditor General, and also, I think, the comments that generally comes from the Audit Committee in the way that we go about spending our limited resources. Internally in the vote, obviously, we've got processes that we've got in place, how to deal with these resources, and those processes, I believe, are appropriate from an accounting officer perspective. Chair, we can deal with the under expenditure as reflected on page 120, and maybe Mr. Basson can give you a little bit of detail. But in fact, if it wasn't for COVID, then we believe our expenditure levels would have been higher. And in fact, the two items where we've underspent in terms of size, those are committed expenditures that's also been honoured in the new year. I think Premier dealt with the issue around the environmental commissioner. Obviously, on the safety plan, Chair, as a department, and also working obviously very closely with the Department of Community Safety and the Department of Health on the implementation of the safety plan. With regard to some of the key projects from an implementation perspective, we will come back to the legislature on that, and you will hear a little bit more of that next month when Premier tables the state of the province address. But in fact, Chair, that plan as is at the moment is in implementation mode. We're working very closely with the city, particularly as it relates to the deployment of LEAP. If you look at what we've put in our recovery plan, Chair, we're also focusing big time on violence prevention initiatives. And in fact, you've heard me talking about the Department of Health. We believe also that there's a major focus for the Department of Health to play, because what happens, obviously, if people get involved in violent behavior, they end up in the health system, and therefore an approach by the Department of Health to deal with the prevention stuff is actually key. So I will leave the other stuff till when Premier comes back to the legislature, when he tables the SOPA in a little bit more, actually less than a month from now. Chair, the questions around the whistleblowing issues that's been raised by Member America, I'm going to ask Ruthven, who's on this call. Ruthven heads up our forensic unit to actually respond to what we're doing whenever we receive a complaint, in the form of obviously being where we actually, the complainant don't want to disclose their details. I mean, Ruthven can give that detail. And then on our gifts register, Chair, I need to emphasize that we've got a policy in place. Obviously, all gifts above 350 must be disclosed, but prior approval must be obtained, as indicated by Member America. Obviously, all gifts below 350 must also be disclosed, but Rikus can give a little bit more detail to that. And I mean, as an accounting officer, I normally sign off on those disclosures that's been made, particularly by our senior managers, and then the managers also deal with the stuff in the particular own space. Chair, on the questions by Member Nkontlo around health and safety, we've got our health and safety policies in place. In fact, a lot of the policies we had to activate in this year, or the last 2-3 weeks of the year, given COVID, but particularly in 19 or 2020, 2021, during the COVID period, we had to activate a lot of the issues that's actually in our policy. Elmo Geldenes, who's actually on this call, he's a director, senior manager in the department responsible for strategy. He's responsible for OHS, so I'm going to also just ask him just to deal with particularly the institutional arrangements, and that's really around how do we make sure our staff are safe from an occupational perspective, and Chair, we take it very serious. And you can also maybe just deal, with the reps and the profile, and then Drikus will particularly deal with the procurement issues. So Drikus, if I can ask you to start and just deal with all the issues around procurement, the economic transformation policy, the stuff that's set out particularly on page 124, and those are the questions raised by Member Nkontlo, and then maybe also touch on just the areas of underspending as raised by Member Dugmore, and then I will, after that, ask Almo Geldenhuis just to talk on the issues of OHS Chair. So, Driekus, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Chair. Am I audible?
You're audible, Driekus, proceed.
Thank you. I'll first deal with Honourable Member America's question on the gift register, essentially wanting to know if it's under 350, must you disclose it and must it be recorded? The answer is yes. It must be recorded in our gift register, and there must still be approval attached to that, although not prior approval if it's under 350. We have a gift policy, and there are different amounts that are approved at different levels.
Sorry. I just want to check. There is this screen that is on the there is this document that is on the screen. What is it for?
Chair, I think that is Washima's document.
No, Chairperson is acting member Dagmar's screen. You must stop sharing his screen.
So, sorry, Member Dagmar, can you just unshare your screen, please? I'm trying to call you just to unshare it.
Oh, okay. Okay, please proceed. You may proceed while that is still taking place.
Thanks, Chair. So anything above 2,000 Rand would require prior approval and must be approved by the accounting officer, for example. Those are all stipulated in the gift policy. Then to go to, I think, Member Nkondlo on page, I must say, Chair, my book has different page numbers for some or other reason. And so at the bottom of 118, that issue around underspending, around staff exits, that sentence there, in fact, this paragraph and this whole page under SCOPA resolutions is taken from the SCOPA report as is from last year. But essentially, a lot of our, and this is where the underspending of last year is explained, not the current reporting period. So this actually relates to 18-19. And so the staff exits was quite a significant part of that underspending. And then the next portion is that we had to shift capital expenditure to operating expenditure because we were moving from hardware to the cloud-based services platform. And then there was also a delay in our network equipment, which had an impact on the capital spend. But as I said, that is for the previous financial year, not the one that we're dealing with. Then on the questions around the page 124 in my book, which is around triple BEE, just to firstly say that that page that we've included on the triple BEE is a standard inclusion for all departments as far as I'm aware, and it was provided to us by Treasury. But I will do my best to explain what some of the questions that came up. Firstly, to note that we have a legislative framework in the province, which comes from Section 217 of the Constitution. There has been a Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act of 2000. And in terms of that legislation, there has been the triple PFA regulations in 2001, 2011, and the latest was in 2017. And I can confirm to the committee that the PPPFA and the regulations is what the department is following. So we are aligned to the legislation and we are aligned to the policy, and all of these requirements are actually included in our accounting officer system, which we use for procurement. Then just on the triple BEE, there's quite a number of objectives within the triple BEE Act. One of them being preferential procurement from enterprises that are owned or managed by Black people. And that specific requirement is translated into the preferential procurement legislation that we see. One of the objectives of the preferential procurement is to use public procurement as a lever to promote socioeconomic transformation, empowerment of small enterprises, rural and township enterprises, and designated groups, and promoting local industry development. Now, back to the economic procurement policy that was also cited, that policy is rather fresh, and I think the implementation has only been a few months in the making. So technically, what that policy is trying to do is it looks at sectors that needs to be promoted in the economy to stimulate growth. For example, certain small businesses. And it wants to target areas. And so this mandate is driven by the Department of Economic Development and Tourism. And Treasury has also had a role in the economic procurement policy. But essentially, that is the objective as far as I have it on that. As far as we are concerned, if we put out a tender, for example, of more than 30 million, we target the subcontracting on that tender at least 30% to what we call EMEs and QSEs, which are the smaller or SMME sectors. And so with each and every bid process, we make sure that we do the necessary analysis and we target within that. So on the so-called or not applicables, when it comes to developing criteria for entering into partnerships with the private sector and also looking at the awarding of incentives, grants, investment schemes in support of BBBE, those processes would be driven centrally by Provincial Treasury because as the Western Cape government, we must move as one. And that's why at the departmental reporting level, we have indicated not applicable. You'll also see the very first line where we indicated not applicable was around the issuing of licenses, concessions, and other, which is not part of our mandate. So to explain, I think if I remember correctly, the previous scoper had a presentation from Treasury on the 30th of August 2017, which spoke to the requirements of BBBE as well as the comparative analysis with the Preferential Procurement Act and how all these things linked. And Chair, I think best perhaps that Treasury come and do a similar presentation to give the committee further information or detail or just to explain what the province is doing in relation to that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Elma.
Good morning, Chairperson, Committee, Premier, DG, colleagues. Thank you very much. The Occupational Health and Safety Act obviously is the act in South Africa that guides OHS matters. And as DG indicated, it is in the Department of the Premier. It's made the responsibility of the Director of Departmental Strategy. So the Act also makes it clear that where an institution has more than 20 staff members, then a representative that would look after the health and safety of the employees need to be appointed and a committee needs to be formed. So in executing the functions and making sure that the workplace is free of hazards and risks, we rely quite heavily on those occupational health and safety reps. All of them are democratically elected in their business units, and they get trained in accordance with the provisions of the Act. They must be trained as well. Their main function is to be the eyes and ears on the operational level. They have a range of roles and responsibilities, but it is all aimed at identifying risks and hazards, bringing it to the attention of the people that need to fix the issues, and also to advise on where the department need to look at OHS-related risks. At the moment in the department, we have about 46 of them. It sounds like a large number, but we must remember that the Department of the Premier is accommodated in a number of different sites across the province, particularly from the CEI perspective, where they have technicians and other CEI staff that also serve areas outside of the metropole. So we've included all of them, and therefore we have about 46 of them. Generally, they are middle management, sometimes a bit lower than middle management level. I must say, DG mentioned the measures that we put in place around COVID. I think we are very fortunate to have a very committed bunch of OHS representatives. They have been doing excellent work during the previous year and continues to do so in how we manage COVID. And they are really executing their duties very well. So they assist with doing the hazard and risk assessments in their units and then put plans together to mitigate those. They also form the departmental OHS committee, which according to the Act must meet 4 times a year. And any issues from an OHS perspective that need to be addressed then gets discussed there, decisions get taken, and we track the resolution of the issues that are mentioned there. Maybe just to also say that each department has this responsibility that I outlined now, but provincially, transversely, the Department of Community Safety has a transversal responsibility in the province, in the Western Cape government, to guide and to coordinate the OHS matters in the Western Cape government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elmo. Chair, I'm going to ask Ruthven to come in to deal with the question of Member America around the whistleblowers. Ruthven? Ruthven, you're on mute.
Apologies. Thank you, DG. Good morning, Honourable Mvimbi and members of the committee. Thank you for the question, Honourable America. I would like to start off by saying that with whistleblowing, one needs to distinguish between the important need of an effective whistleblowing system and in pursuit of good governance and anti-corruption, but then also to strike a balance where persons' rights are affected. And that goes to the heart of your question. On the other hand, with regard to good governance, whistleblowing is more often than not the only chance that an organization like the Western Cape government have to uncover corruption, because corruption is hidden. Now, I believe the Western Cape government whistleblowing policy does strike a balance between these features. The whistleblowing policy explains the requirements of protected whistleblowing, and then the whistleblower will be protected from reprisals. That is important as one reads in the media. Often whistleblowers are exposed to all kinds of things, and we need to prevent that in Western Cape government. On the other hand, the whistleblowing policy makes it clear that a person who reports false information intending to harm another, then such a person commits an offence in terms of the Protected Disclosures Act. Now, operationally at the Provincial Forensic Services, we also have certain controls in order to manage the situation where persons' rights are affected and implicated. Firstly, our intake process makes provision for certain verifications before registering a case for actual forensic investigation. But more importantly, we deal with information very discreetly and confidentially to protect the rights of the persons who are implicated. And it's a well-established principle and practice that we only communicate findings of investigations and also the allegations that are made to the relevant HOD of the department. As far as if it happens that a false allegation is made, as I mentioned, the person affected by that can lodge a criminal case with the police. But in addition to that, if the whistleblower's identity is known, such a person, and if the whistleblower is an official of the Department of the Western Cape government, such a person would invariably breach the code of conduct. And in such an instance, a disciplinary action against the whistleblower is possible. I hope that answers the question.
Chair, from our side, I think there is one more response that is outstanding. We've responded to all the issues. Just the last issue, Lucas, I think it's on your side. I mean, obviously, I've indicated we're taking governance quite serious, and generally, our governance committees that happens on a quarterly basis form as part of our EXCO. Obviously, our entire top management team is part of that. And Lucas, maybe you can respond. But generally, Chair, remember people must also take leave, and sometimes there might be things, you know, that keeps them away from some of these meetings. But you can see in relation to the rest of the department, I mean, our governance committee is generally well represented. And as accounting officer, I've also focused particularly on the implementation of our risk management strategies, stuff that comes from the EXA, as well as obviously also the audit committee. So I don't know, Lucas, maybe you were just on leave during those times. Do you want to maybe just respond to that?
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, members and colleagues. Yes, thank you, DG. I must just say to Honourable Member Dugmore that I think nobody was more surprised than me when I saw that. And I think my colleagues will vouch for me. I generally attend all EXCO governance related meetings. And in fact, I can't remember when last I tendered an apology for a meeting. My best guess would be that it coincided with leave, and perhaps there was one or more urgent commitments that I had to attend to. But I want to assure Member Dugmore that I am going to check in my diary what happened on those dates, because otherwise it's going to bother me. Thanks, Chair.
Chair, that then I think takes care of all the responses by the respective members. Chair, so if I can hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG. Can we have questions on section E, honorable members? Section E start from 169. Honorable Mackenzie. Honorable Dugmore. Honorable America. In that, Honorable Nkondlo, in that order.
Chairperson, just for clarity, are we doing the NHS as well?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Chairperson, yes, if we can just get those, one, I appreciate that Mr. Buter obviously attended a lot of meetings, but it's important that, and also to the audit committee, that one do put in reasons as to why individuals do not attend the meeting. So the official don't have to sit now and go back in his diary and see where he was. So I think it's important note for this committee to understand. But we'll make a resolution at the end of the meeting. Chairperson, I'm going to start on page 175, just to get some understanding for the big ticket items, particularly those that were not in the notes. And I'm using my hard copy, so the pages are slightly different from the e-version. So my hard copy, page 175, the appropriation statement. If we can just get the reason, I'm sure the CFO's got them with us, share with us, where there were vimans done, but they were still underspent. And we see now, obviously, some of the money has been surrendered to the revenue fund. I'm going to just give a few items that I would like an explanation of. I'm sure other members would cover their sections as well. Under computer systems, we saw the shifting of the funds. We saw the environment done there as well. If we can just get some of the reasons why the funds were not spent. Consultants, business and advisory services. under the contractors, and also just give us a breakdown. If you don't have it with you, we can always submit in writing. What is the list of those contractors, and what are the difference between the consultancy, business advisory service consultants, and the contractors? Similarly to the operating leases and the property payments. I presume those are public works, but you can share those with us. Thank you. And also on page number 176, there's also operating payments. So I just want some understanding of that. And then, Chairperson, I'm going to go to page 226. We did discuss this matter with the Auditor General as well. Just on the claim, and I think it's page 251 is the more detailed breakdown, if I'm right. Yeah, the JF van Niekerk and CMU Park. What is the latest on that potential liability?
But as I said, this is a confidential conversation. You can,
and then Mr. Van Hoof,
you can just write it out.
Can you mute?
Who's that too?
Mr. Gavin van der Hoeven.
Mr. Gavin van der Hoeven, can you mute your mic, please?
Chair, I just muted him.
Thank you, Chair. On page 250 on the CMU Park, the property damage claim, what is the latest? And perhaps to the legal eagles, page 2, where is 226 linked to page 250, the claims against the department, 184 million. And then on that, from the legal eagles from the department, there's a line that I not fully understand in this claim. Perhaps they'll explain it when they give us. It says the matter has been discussed with the council and the state attorney has further been instructed to set a current exception down for hearing as the plaintiff has failed to respond to this. If we can just get it, just for my understanding, just a detailed breakdown of that explanation. But if they explain the claim, perhaps I'll understand that better. And that'll be my questions, Chairperson. Thank you.
Honorable Dagmo.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, my question also relates to this matter, which has been reported on before. On page 171, which Member Mackenzie has also referred to. So could we just be reminded again, who exactly are the plaintiffs, and what is the property involved? I think at some level, I recall this as something to do with some or other development that was going on in the area of the Mossel Bay municipality, but it just seems that this matter has been dragging on, and maybe Mr. Buter can also indicate what are the remedies to the province here of actually ensuring that this matter gets drawn to a close, approaching the court possibly, because it really does seem to be dragging on. So we would just like to be reminded, who are the plaintiffs, what is the property involved, and what can the province do to actually to approach the court to have this matter concluded in a much speedier fashion. Thanks.
Honorable America.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I up to be directed to 10.5 on page 226, and it is the impairment of receivables. There's an estimated amount of 196,000 Rand, and that relates to long outstanding debt cases which have remained dormant and where recoverability is doubtful. So I'd like to know what's the age evaluation for dormant debt to be written off, and why is that irrecoverable debt of 196,000 not to be considered for a write-off? And then secondly, Chair, on 16.2, and that deals with contingent assets on page 228. 28. So I just want to more clarity around contingent assets, and the explanation that is in the financial statements revolves around leave and incapacity leave and in health retirement cases were reviewed, and a total of 68 cases were approved, 15 cases declined, 2 cases still pending. So I just want to, in my mind, conceptualize the description of a contingent asset in terms of I mean, we know the contrast is contingent liability, where it's a debt that could possibly become due at a future date. Is in this instance, is it an asset that will, revert back to the department at future date? Just a little more clarity on that. And then lastly, Chair, 21.3, and that's on page 232. No, 234. It deals with irregular expenditure not condoned. So often it involves not, very large amounts, where perhaps an employee was booked for 2 nights at a particular accommodation, and due to circumstances had to stay for 3 nights and incur 1 night's irregular expenditure. But be it as it may, if in an instance where an irregular expenditure is not condoned, it is sure circumstances and individual circumstances will determine that. In particular, is the expectation of the department or the individual or the unit within the department is expected to be liable for that expenditure if it is not condoned? And lastly, yeah, I'll leave it at that now. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Honorable Mgonzo.
No, thank you. Thank you, Chairperson. Considering that there were no follow-ups in Section C, Chair, perhaps that could be a matter for resolutions. But I must just raise my disappointment, Chair, with the fact that I think on the question that we were raising on the triple BE, the answer is so much about us getting more a repeat presentation of National Treasury than explanation about an economic policy that which we were asking and its relevance in trying to express itself in as far as Triple BE Act is concerned. Perhaps we can make a resolution when we get to that point. I just wanted to make that point, Chair. Then I think, Chair, in terms of this particular section that we are in, I see, although I can concede there, Chair, in page 205, that this may be an HR question. I think one is rather, linked to the question I asked earlier on, which I was referred to as an audit report of a previous financial year. But I think once again, in page 205, you can see almost in all the programs that there were staff exits, in this reporting or in this financial year that we're dealing with, which perhaps either the DG can just explain. I might not have been a party to the discussion of that specific a chapter, but just to give an indication about these staff exits. And then I think on page 226, Chair, in my ebook, there is a mention there of sort of an irrecoverable. I just want to read it. My apologies, Chair, because I must just go to the page. But in my ebook is 226. Okay, yes, Chair. I think under 10.5 impairment of receivables, there is the note that indicates that long outstanding debt cases which have remained dormant where recoverability is doubtful. Can I just get more explanation of what this means in simple layman's terms? And then from that page, Chair, and then I want to ask, I think the questions on that claim have been asked by the other members. My question there to add on them on 228 is just to find out, according to the department and their engagements on this particular matter, what would they say are the probabilities of this case, and what is the possible, if they are aware of that, given their involvement in the negotiations, what is the possible closure of this matter if they do have that particular indication? And then my last one, Chair, is on 234 on my ebook that relates to the irregular expenditure. Because if one considers you know, what is in the report under this particular page, I just want to understand what is the principle of total prior period errors, because also I think it's there under fruitless and wasteful expenditure. If that can just be explained in layman's terms to me, and I think there's almost 124, I think, K, in as far as that is concerned under this page. I just wanted to understand what does that mean, and maybe some detail of what does that involved. I think I'm covered by Member America about the condonement, because also I wanted to understand what are the circumstances, or what is the situation with the amount that is still not condoned. And if one consider that the prior year and current year, you know, in under page 235, that if you look at those amounts, one, you could see that there is an increase. And lastly, I think on the next page on fruitless and wasteful expenditure, the similar, if you look at the previous year and the current year, and just to get an indication of what are the kind of issues being raised here, because when one reads again in the box there, one can see that there is an indication there that 4 amounts were resolved, 1 amount is still to be recovered from the supplier, 2 amounts concluded as being valid expenditure, and 1 case to be written off. Can we just get more detail about what are these cases, or if one can be referred maybe to the page that gives more detail? Thank you, Chair.
Honorable Mare.
Chairman, I just want to ask members, thank you. I listened carefully to what was said, but I must leave the meeting unfortunately earlier. Some urgent matters I got to attend to. I hope to be excused. I just want to leave the meeting with one thing. I'm a bit disappointed by the President's in the ill-advised statement that read as follows, that Black businesses must benefit from COVID, and it was widely published in the papers. That cannot be a criteria. We're going to look at the people that must benefit by the vaccine, not any particular color entrepreneur. I'm very disappointed in our president, and I hope Premier will take note of it and make sure that we will only look at the people's welfare. We will look at the people who must get the vaccine and not who will benefit or profiteer from dispensing of this vaccine. BBE should not play. BBE should not play any role in dispensing. That is a human issue. We must save lives. COVID is not there to save businesses or to enrich people. And President Ramaphosa's statement has left me with great concern that the dispensing of COVID vaccines will be seen as a golden money-making exercise for Black businesses. We're going to concentrate on efficient distribution to those people who urgently need the vaccine. Thank you.
Can we get responses from the Premier and the DG on the questions that we asked?
Thank you, Chair. I think most of them will be done by the DG, but the last question by the Honourable Marais is not actually for this.
That was not a question. That was not a question, Honourable Premier. So I don't think that's why I'm asking if responses can be given to questions that we ask.
Okay, cool. I'll head back to the DG.
I love difficult questions.
I thought you were leaving, Honourable Marais.
I had to honor the Premier by listening to his response, but I'll raise it again in SOPA. Maybe he will respond then.
I will then.
Okay. You are excused, Honourable Elder.
Thank you.
DG.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for allowing me to proceed. There are basically two sets of questions. The one deals with the claim of damages, the 184 million, and I'm going to ask Lucas Buter to deal with the detail. I think it's basically by two members. Member Dugmore as well as Member Nkontlo raised a connecting question to that. And then once that's done, I'm then going to ask Rikus Basson, the CFO, to deal with some of the other matters, and then I will right at the end come back and just deal with the one HR issue. So Lucas, can I hand over to you? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, DG. I think I'm just going to read to the members a very short summary that I have, which I think would answer some of the questions, and then I'll just add a little bit to it to answer some of the questions that were asked by Member Dugmore in particular. So this is a claim for damages instituted by 89 plaintiffs, and that would also explain, obviously, the quantum of the claim against the Premier of the Western Cape, Mossel Bay Municipality, and the National Home Builders Registration Council. The plaintiffs are all residents and property owners in the development known as CMU Park, Mossel Bay, and their claim arose when cracks appeared in the buildings, streets and pavements in the development. Ground movement eventually caused severe structural distress in certain buildings and the collapse of some of the units. All of the defendants are defending the action against them. The plaintiffs have failed to cite the MEC responsible for environmental affairs and development planning. However, they vaguely allege, and I think that is a note that we've made in the statements, that the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning received, evaluated and issued approvals of all the applications for land use changes associated with the subject properties. There is obviously no connection between the Premier and the alleged vague conduct by the department, which has allegedly caused the plaintiffs damages. The plaintiffs nevertheless chose to cite the Premier as a defendant, which meant that the quantum of the claim had to be reflected as a contingent liability in the financial statements of our department. We are dealing with the incorrect citation of the Premier and other defects in the summons by way of an exception, and I'll just explain very quickly what that means, because we believe that the summons is vague and does not disclose a cause of action, and a hearing date is awaited for the exception to be argued. So maybe just on a technical level to explain what an exception means. So when a plaintiff issues a summons against a defendant, the plaintiff must plead his or her case properly and they must disclose a cause of action. Now, all three defendants in this matter have filed exceptions to this particular summons. In our case, apart from the citation of the Premier, as I said, the summons is vague. It doesn't disclose a cause of action against the Premier or the Department of Environmental Affairs. The plaintiffs are yet to respond to a second exception that we've actually filed in this matter. But in the meantime, the court has also found in favour of the third respondent, the National Home Builders Registration Council, who filed their own exception, as I've said. And that order was made with costs. So what is going to happen now is either the plaintiffs are going to remedy their summons and make the necessary changes so that the defendants are happy with the contents, In which case, of course, then the three defendants will plead and the matter will, in the normal course, probably become quite a protracted action in the High Court, and it could be subject to appeals. So then it will run its normal course. However, if the plaintiffs do not remedy the summons, what would then happen in all likelihood is that we would then apply for the claim to be dismissed. So I think that's where we are at the moment, and I think we are putting quite a lot of energy into this, and we clearly want to deal with the matter efficiently and as timely as possible, because I mean nobody wants a 184 million claim hanging over your head. So I would like to give the committee the assurance that we are dealing with this. It unfortunately is at a very early stage. It's a very technical thing that we're having to deal with, but we're putting quite a lot of energy into it. And hopefully by the next time we report to the committee, we will be able to tell you that the claim has been dismissed, or that the matter has been, the summons has been remedied, and that the matter is now being navigated through the court system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lucas. Driekus?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, DG. Luckily, we have until 11 o'clock, because I note that I have quite a bit to get through, but I'll try and be as efficient as possible. Firstly, Chair, let me just apologize to Member Nkondlo around the BBBE comment. I have noted that the specialist on the economic procurement policy does not reside in this department. I would suggest that DDAT, or the Department of Economic Development and Tourism, brief the SCOPA on the tenets of the economic procurement policy. I think that will take the committee forward. Thank you on that. So I just needed to clear that. Then back to Member Mackenzie. On page 175 of the book, he indicated why is it that we do environments and to an item like computer services only to underspend at the end of that year. Now, the answer is a bit complex or technical, but firstly to note, environments can happen at any time of the year. And then there's also what we call final environments that happen at the end of a financial year. Now, for example, if you look at Program 3, People Management, they might require a system to build efficiencies within the HR space. The developer of that system is CEI, which is Program 4. So environment of a couple of million, for example, if you look at the 4.6 million in the environment column, would have then benefited computer services within CEI, and that could happen during the year. At the end of the year, that money would have been spent. However, the 6 million variance that you find there is also explained elsewhere in this book as two things. One is underspend on cybersecurity tender. The other one was an underspending due to delays with a ECM, or electronic content management tender. So the identity of the environment and the identity of the underspend is not the same identity. Secondly, just to note that when we finalize the environments at the end of the year, we are required to show underspending on earmarked allocations, and we have a number of earmarked allocations in our department. So part of it is also resetting and making sure that we are able to show those underspendings as required. So that's the technical understanding on environments. At the same time, Member Mackenzie asked for a number of items to be explained. Firstly, the difference between the item business and advisory services and the item contractors. If I purchase a bus ride for my pay interns, that bus company is not giving me any business service or advisory service or research service for that matter. They are simply being contracted. Hence, I would spend that under contractors. If I need a security company at Cromeria, that's a contractor. Cleaning company, contractor. If I'm doing research on communication in COVID, that is business and advisory. And similarly, the audit committee audit committee members are also remunerated under business and advisory services. So that explains the difference between those two items. If I can just go to the specific items. Under computer services, that's where we spend most of our money. Because we have the broadband project, SITA, for example, received 365 million rand in that year. Microsoft Ireland for the Microsoft licensing received 117 million. And there's a number of other firms like EOH, Data Centric, Seasware, all of them received money under that item. So that's largely software licensing and other computer services that resides there. I've already spoken about some of the items that reside under business and advisory services. So I won't go back to that one. Then under contractors, I've also explained what we purchased there. AV equipment, for example, the employee health and wellness contract resides there. The security, as I mentioned, at Cromeria and our George campus. And then transport for interns was spent under that item. Then I was asked to talk to operating leases. That is simply the payment for our copier machines, photocopiers in the department. And property payments, let's just get to that item. Property payments, the following expenses are applicable. Cleaning services at George's office is related to that property, so it's expended here. Gardening services at the office, and then restaurant management fees for Cromeria. It's about 800,000 that we spend under that specific one. The other item I was asked to explain is operating payments, and there we professional bodies membership and subscription fees is a large element of that. For example, we paid the Gartner subscription for CEI colleagues of 3.6 million in that year. And then all our printing and publications are paid from that item, as well as resettlement costs for staff. So I hope that covers all the items that the member requested of me. Then I'll move to, Lucas has dealt with the CMU Park matter. Honorable Member America wanted to understand the impairment, and I think Member Nkondlo also had a question on that, so I'll deal with it at the same time. The question is, what is the age that we consider write-off for very old cases? Now, it depends on the specifics of the specific debt matter, to the extent that if we've placed the debtor in mora and they have acknowledged their debt, then obviously we have 3 years to recover that debt. Now, if we are unsuccessful in year 2, let's say, and we issue new notice to that debtor, we again put them, the 3 years evolve. So not all old debts are necessarily irrecoverable. There are some old debts that are still in motion and where we still have activity. It's just that part of that debt we might consider irrecoverable. So there's not a specific age that I can mention here that we would target. The other question is, when would we consider write-off? We would look at the quantum of the debt in terms of our policy. Any old matter under 3,000, we would want to write it off because it's simply uneconomical to invest further time and effort, especially if it has to go by a state attorney. So that we also consider. So in simple layman's terms, what irrecoverable debt means, and that is on page 224, is when you look at all your debt on the books, and you remember that debt is an asset as far as I'm concerned, because it's money that you can actually hopefully recover and cash back into your books. The irrecoverable part or the impairment simply says, this is the bucket of debt that I believe we would have difficulty in sourcing from the debtor. Very old cases, complex matters, etc. So that covers the impairment issue. On page 227, Member America also asked about contingent assets. He explained that the contingent liability, which is on the other side of that scheme, is where you say that I might have to pay this or I might not, maybe dependent on a court case. Now, a contingent asset in that specific disclosure that we made there is around the pillar cases. So somebody took extended sick leave because they had a medical complaint. And in terms of our pillar application system and our health risk manager, they have to supply certain information, evidence, etc., and it will then be tested to say, is this temporary disability of this person, was it in actual fact necessary or not? And after investigation, the health risk manager might come back and say, yes, it's fine, in which case nothing happens, the leave is approved. Or if he says, no, we find against the employee, they were actually not sick enough to not work, then obviously we might have to recover some of that unpaid or some of the what we call unpaid leave. And those amounts that potentially comes in is then considered an asset, a contingent asset, because it's contingent upon the health risk manager's final say, and then we can hopefully get some money into the department should the employee have to pay back those days. Then page 231, item 21.3, the question Member America had is, if we do not condone irregular, firstly, why would we not condone irregular expenditure? There are two matters that immediately comes to mind. One is if the irregular was due to gross negligence or willfulness on the part of an employee, and that amount becomes recoverable from the employee. The other one is, for instance, if you did business with a company that does not pay tax to SARS, they're not tax compliant, you would not be able to condone that specific expenditure until that company proves that they are now tax compliant. So that we just make sure that the state coffers actually benefit where it should. And then, as I think I mentioned, that should there be liability on the part of the person who created the irregular, obviously we would want to then recover, and that recovery, as far as I know, happens in terms of the debt policy in the end. Then if I can move to Member Nkondlo, the staff exits, in Part D of the annual report, we actually explain some of the reasons for exits. I think one of the tables there goes into it. But our staff do leave for better opportunities, better remuneration, and technically, ordinarily, it takes us about 3 months to replace that staff member. So you end up having had budget for 12 months, but you only had employment for 9 months, and that's where the saving or the underspend then comes into the picture. But the reasons for the exits, those are covered under the section that we dealt with the other standing committee. Then there were further questions on irregular expenditure. What is the principle around the prior period errors, both in irregular and fruitless and wasteful? So what happens is when we detect a fruitless or a irregular matter, we often look and see whether it has to do with a contract that has been in operation for a number of years, perhaps. So we are required to go back in history and go and see, were there any this specific irregular action in this year? Did it also occur in previous years? And in terms of the template of the annual financial statements, we then have to declare those old amounts as well, as we have done there. In this specific case, it was ICAS. Now, ICAS helps us with the vetting of new employees, pay interns, etc. If you apply for a job, we take your fingerprints, we check your qualifications, we check your SAPS history and all of those things. And in this case, there were some glitches on their system, and we had duplicate vetting invoicing that we had to pay. Now that both on the, then became irregular and fruitless and wasteful. And the company, to the extent that it was a mistake on their system, they then repaid some amounts to us. To the extent that it was a mistake on the side of employees of .P, obviously those would not have been recovered from the firm, and we would be liable for those. So that's the principle. And then the question was, why is the irregular expenditure and the fruitless and wasteful totals more this year than the previous year? Now, just to note, fruitless and wasteful, I couldn't see a major difference in that number. Let's just get to the specific page. I think it was 40. The amount was 40 the previous year and it's 45 this year. Just to note, if you look at the middle, yes.
Mr. Passon, it's not just, I'm not trying to cut you out, just to urge you just to round up, because I know you've said that you've got time until 11 o'clock, but there are also other activities that the committee must do before that 11 o'clock. So if you can please round up.
No problem, Chair. I'm on my last one. If one looks at the fruitless and wasteful table on at 22.1 on my page 232, the fruitless and wasteful expenditure relating to the current year was only 9,000. The previous year it was 46,000. So in terms of that, it in fact has dropped. Some of the total that you see, in fact, if you look at the years, they actually roll over into the new year. And so once we finalize the matters of 2018-19, that number should be much less. If one looks at page 231 under 21.1, the reconciliation of irregular expenditure, you'll see that again, about 5-6 lines down, the irregular expenditure relating to the current year was 994,000. But you'll see that the total of the rollover of the previous year, inclusive, that's 2.073 million. And the explanation there is that the Treasury has not yet finalized the condonation of the old matters of 18-19. So in fact, if you look at our current year, it's actually going down. And then lastly, I think the member had a question about the fruitless and wasteful, just in terms of details of the valid expenditure. Those actually, there were 2 cases amounting to about 262 rand, which were regarded as valid expenses. And that is where persons rented vehicles in Johannesburg and they had stone damage to the windscreens. Obviously, it was not their fault. And in terms of definition, that is then a valid expense. And I've already mentioned the duplicate vetting. There was an amount of 43,000, sorry, Chair, that had to be written off, and an amount of 344 rand to be recovered from ICAS. And lastly, there was a 1,300 rand damage also on a rental, which will be recovered from the service provider via the agency, our travel agency. Thanks, Chair. I think that covers everything that were questioned.
Chair, I think Driekus has responded to the one question that was raised on the HR matter, so I'm not going to go into detail. I can hand back to you, Chair. Thanks.
Honorable Mackenzie.
Yes, Chairperson, just one follow-up from the CFO, and thank you. Under operating leases, I'm not sure if you indicated that was only for copiers, or was it just an example of copiers? And I just wanted to get clarity on that, because then my question would be, is that only for the Department of the Premier, or is that for some other departments as well? Because that's quite an amount, 2.6 million rand a year for a copy as well, less the shifting of funds, 1.9 million. So I just need to clarity on that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Driekus, can you respond to that? I mean, it also includes our vehicles and stuff, Driekus. It's on page 217. It's 1.9 million.
217.
Yeah, it's a total of 1.9 million under operating leases. So what exactly is it?
Chair, that 90% of that amount is photocopy machines. And because we are running, as Almo explained earlier, also a number of different floors in rented and other buildings which all require photocopiers. So the majority is photocopy machines, and those are all for the Department of the Premier.
Sorry, Chair, can I just follow up to close this question?
Yes.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just battling to understand, because last year was 2 million. does it include printers as well? And is that obviously toners? Is that part of the lease agreement, toner servicing and all those things? Because that's quite an amount for copier machines.
Chair, that would be the rental on the copiers. And we also do pay for copies, but I suspect that might be elsewhere. But I can confirm that rather in writing, Chair.
That will
Thank
help.
you, Chairperson.
Chair, I think that takes care of the responses.
Any follow-ups, honorable members?
See, Chairperson, if I may just, the reason I'm asking that question, because just above that line, there's consumable stationery printing for 3.2 million rand. And last year that was 2.6 million. So it's an increase of nearly 500,000. And that's why I'm just trying to make sure that my understanding of the operating leases, because that'll be nearly 6 million rand, or sort of 5 million, 4.9 for this year alone. And obviously office supplies can be pen, papers, and those things. I'm just trying to get an understand, because that's printing is part of that line. So printing and leasing, and we were saying leases could include toners, etc. It's quite a sizable amount that we're spending. Perhaps if you get a breakdown, it'll help my understanding of how we spend 5 million rand a year on printing, office supplies, and this is a year-on-year expense, which for the last 2 years average about between 4.7 and 5 million rand. And are we allowed, just as a secondary question on that, to purchase it outright, or is that not allowed in terms of the PFMA, as opposed to taking out a service contract only, do the expense upfront, and wouldn't it be cheaper over the long term? If that the CFO can share with us if such an exercise was ever done, to say it's cheaper to purchase outright, let lease the service contract over a year and save that expense, or is that not allowed in terms of the PFMA? Thank you.
Because you want to respond, obviously, Chair, the form of acquisition, whether you lease an item or whether you buy it outright, that is just a departmental decision around how you want to procure a particular good, or well, it's actually you can't rent services, but I mean that's how you want to procure a particular good. Obviously, with regards to the rental of these equipment, we then do not have to spend money, obviously, when it breaks down, when there are call-out fees and stuff like that, because there are lots of other things that also generally comes with photocopy machines. Obviously, taking into account, Chair, that I think the operating expenditure under these kind of things are generally high, and therefore, as part of one's acquisition strategy, you would consider all these things when you acquire it. But I think, as Drika has indicated, let's unpack what sits within that item operating leases, and we can provide that for you in a response, and then maybe also respond in that same vein on the choice of either leasing something or renting something vis-a-vis outright buying it. So it's the benefits and what are the disadvantages of that. Thanks, Chair.
I take it that will be in writing, DG.
Chair, that will be in writing. I'm sure once we get your letter, we will definitely respond. But I mean, we will go ahead and prepare it in the meantime.
Okay, sure.
Chair?
No, excellent. Mr. Paswan?
Yeah, perhaps just also for Member Mackenzie, the printing requirements of Department of the Premier includes the Provincial Training Institute at Cromeria. I mean, there you're looking at manuals that need to be printed, training materials. Similarly, we have other training venues within .P that will take quite a bit, but obviously we will provide that info. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, if there are no further follow-ups, members of the audit committee, Chairperson, is there any issue you'd like to raise or any comments you'd like to make? Audit Committee?
Nothing from the Audit Committee side. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. I see Honorable Mackenzie's hand is up.
Yes, Chairperson, if for future purposes, I made a comment earlier on from the audit committee, if we can just do and perhaps something that scope out we need to look at in the future, that we just have the reasons why people don't attend the meeting. So in case of Mr. Butler's case, he doesn't have to go back and see where he was. So that we know if Ricardo didn't attend the meeting, Ricardo was off ill or Ricardo attended another parliamentary committee. That's why I was absent for this committee. So when I sit with this book on my own in future individuals 10 years from now, and they see Ricardo didn't attend 1 out of 3 meetings, they have the reasons and they don't have to go do research as to why he didn't attend only 1 out of 5 meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Mackenzie. Honorable Ngondlo?
No, thank you, Chair. I think following suit from Member Mackenzie, can I also make a suggestion, Chair, that I think on the previous page we're dealing with, where there is non-applicable, which I think the Mr. Passon explained that it is residing in the Department of Treasury to develop those. I think it would be better in that column to make that reference, because indeed, as Honorable Mackenzie is raising, these books, yes, are for people like us who would have their access, for explanation from the official of the department, but also for ordinary members. So it shouldn't be difficult for a person to understand. So I think that note for me is better than saying not applicable, because then you are able to make reference that the person can then be able to then be directed to check with the provincial treasurer or any other department that is responsible for that specific matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Honorable Ngondlo. AG, any comment, AG, you'd like to make?
Thank you, Chairperson. Nothing from our side.
Thank you very much, Madam Adams. Now, if there are no further comments or follow-ups from honorable members, let me make use of the opportunity, or maybe DG, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Chair, from my side, not anything particular other than to say thank you to the committee members for their time and also the questions. And I mean, just to give you the reassurance of our commitment towards good governance and to, I think, generally up our game on performance to make sure that the best services get to the public. So from our side, on behalf of the entire department, thank you. And maybe also from our side as the county officer to thank all the senior managers that's on this call, I think, for the commitment and the work that's been delivered during the period of reporting. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Honorable Premier.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the DG has said it all, but thank you to the members. And of course, obviously this is a very, very serious part of governance, making sure that there's reporting and oversight. So thank you very much to both the department and everyone in the department, but also to the members of this committee. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Honorable Premier. Also to the DG as well. I would also like to make use of the opportunity to thank the Audit Committee as well for their presence and also for the report that they've given to us, as well as to the Auditor General as well, for ever always being available and be of assistance. Thank you very much for actually availing yourself. Now we have come almost to the end of the meeting, but before that, I would like to ask the members to remain behind, but also all our guests would like to, guests from the department, including the Premier, would like to excuse them so that we can continue with the business of the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Thank you, DG.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Why is Honorable Doug Moore leaving?
He's in Parliament.
Huh? Or he's changing, he's leaving from the committee to Parliament. Honorable Dagbo.
I'm sorry, I've just got a real problem with this Teams. I must get someone to help me because the video just seems to be, I don't have any control over it. I don't actually know if you can even see me, or I'm trying to just mute the camera, but things just, I hope my camera is off, Chair.
We understand the technology sometimes, especially when it comes to people who were there way before the technology came. Sometimes it takes time for them to adapt. We understand, Honorable Dagmo.
Druk net die knoppie. Druk net die knoppie.
Die groen knoppie.
Now, honorable members, I know it's for today's meeting, especially the members of the SCOPA, we seem to be doing fairly well on time, unlike in the previous two meetings. Now, this opportunity we want to make use of if there are any resolutions that the members would like to propose to be adopted by the committee. I'm going to afford that opportunity to members. Any takers on resolution, or Honorable Mackenzie?
Chairperson, perhaps just just a briefing report from the department on the expenditures under consumable supplies, consumable stationery, which is printing and office supplies, and the operating leases. And under that 112, if an exercise was done to determine best value for Western Cape Department of the Premier on outright purchase of items such as copier machines versus leasing of the copier machines. If such an exercise was done, and if that can be provided to the committee. So I hope, Dustin, that I make sense.
Yes, yes, ma'am. But then what I'll put it in the adequate wording.
Thank you. And if we can just get we can just get a breakdown, sorry, the latest on the claims, just a status report on the claims, and perhaps how much money has been spent to date by the Western Cape government on legal fees. Thank you. On this matter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mackenzie. Honorable Nkondlo.
No, thank you, Chair. It's very interesting that I seem to be in agreement with Honorable Mackenzie on this in this meeting. It's a very uncanny coincidence, but
it's 2021.
You're getting closer. You're getting closer.
It's actually worrying. It's very worrying.
It's raining outside. It's raining.
Having said that, it's okay, Honorable Mitchell. It's okay. Having said that, Chair, I fully, I think, support him, especially on the second one, because I would have asked for some briefing on the claim, but I'm actually covered by his resolution, so that at least we get to understand this matter and the developments around it. And then, Chair, I think on this matter of the economic policy, perhaps we may request that the Economic Development Standing Committee perhaps joined with us as SCOPA, because SCOPA will always be interested on it from a compliance point of view, just to get them, because it is, as it is said, it's a recently approved policy which is in its initial stages of implementation. Perhaps it would help to get that full presentation so that some of the questions that we had asked, can better be answered there. I think for me, Chair, I think that is what I would suggest on the issues of the economic policy of the province. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Nkondlo. Any further proposals on resolution? Honorable Dagmo.
Yeah, Chair, just to say that maybe your committee has dealt with this matter before, but if I'm I'm not mistaken, the audit costs, as I saw them, for this particular department are about 6.5 million. I recall reading that somewhere in the documentation. I just, maybe not necessarily for a resolution, but could you just clarify me, have you as the standing committee got a sense from the Auditor General about the kind of average costs for the audit? Because it just seemed to me that an amount of 6.5 million for this audit is quite a lot. And maybe if I can get clarity, then we can consider whether we need a resolution on that. And yeah, if we could just also on page 250, which I think is under the section E, the Cape Higher Education Consortium. If we could just get as a resolution, if the department could provide us information as to, firstly, when was the last time that the Department of the Premier actually met the Cape Higher Education Consortium? Have all funds allocated to the consortium been spent? And what did the expenditure actually, what was the expenditure on, and what was actually produced from the allocation to the Cape Higher Education Consortium? Thanks. And I'm covered by Member Nkondlo on the economic policy. I'm just concerned, Chair, that the Department of the Premier is actually supposed to be giving advice to all departments, and if they have now referred us back to economic development, I'm very concerned, because this department gives transversal advice. And if there seems to be sort of confusion around the issue of preferential procurement, I'm concerned. But I will go with the proposal that's been made by Member Nkondlo.
Honorable America. Honorable America.
Sorry, Chair, I remuted myself. I'm not too sure about the audit cost of 6.5 million, and I think my reading of the documentation, probably last night, was 650,000 Rand. I may be mistaken, so I will be corrected, but I think it's 650,000 Rand and not 6.5 million Rand.
Yeah,
I'm
thank you
subject
very
to
much.
correction, Chair,
Because
yeah.
I was going to ask also, because we did not really ask from the audit, from the Auditor General, but also maybe if it can, if that amount, Comrade Cameron, it might be for the auditing for all the departments. I don't know. Maybe it might be a good question to ask. Actually, I think there's still time, even when we meet with the Auditor General. Especially if we can ask that question in other departments as well. They will always be auditing cost.
Thank you, Chair. Member America might be correct, or maybe I misread it at 650,000. But if we could just sort of request clarity on the audit costs for the Department of the Premier, it just gives us a sense then as to what the different departments are basically paying the Auditor General in a given year per vote. Thanks.
Honorable Mackenzie, I take it you will want to answer maybe on this, because otherwise Honorable Bartman was before you,
Chair,
unless she is going to raise a... Yes.
I agree with the sentiments expressed by Member Dagmar, because one need to get a cost of, in fact, of all departments, but the amount is 650,000. But by the sentiments, I agree with him 100%. We need to get a sense of how much all departments cost this audit. Thank you.
Honorable Bartman.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was actually going to make the same recommendation that you made, to simply in writing via SCOPA that we just ask for all of the amounts from all of the departments and the entities. I think we did a similar exercise last year, and obviously, like, we have to pay the Auditor General every year. It's just unfortunately something we have to do, and the amount we pay obviously also depends on the scope of the audit that they have determined. Secondly, just a point of clarity that I wanted to find out. The preferential procurement, to my knowledge, we've already asked this information both in economic development as well as in SCOPA, but I can be possibly incorrect in this regard, and it does fall within the economic development department. So what SCOPA could do is simply ask for the respective information, and there's simply as well as invite the respective committees as well to join them in the respective committee. Thank you.
No problem. Can be a joint thing. I think there was also another department where we said we would like to have maybe a joint session on a matter. I think it was the Department of Education. The more the merrier. It's always good if we do things jointly. No, I think there's no problem about that. Any further proposal for resolution, honorable members? Now, I think then, honorable members, this has come to the end of the meeting, but before maybe I see Honorable Mackenzie and Honorable Dagmore, your hands are up.
Chairperson, just the last point. Sorry, I do apologize. On the library corners, the 21 million rand, sorry, I just wanted to go to that page, the transfers to non-profit organizations. It's under just library business corners. Unless any member of the committee or any other colleague perhaps have this information, or Dustin or any other, I'm just trying to understand exactly what this was for. It says library business corners. Is there a list that anybody perhaps found in SCOPA of this? Who was it transferred to? What does it mean, library business? Was it just transferred to? Is there an NGO called Library Business Corners? If any other members do have this, they can perhaps direct me to it, but I can't seem to find it. But I just want to get an understanding what it was for. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you very much, honorable member. Is there any member who can assist Honorable Mackenzie on this matter? Or procedural officer, you'll just take it up and make a follow-up on it?
Yes, Chairperson, I've written it down for that we request just a reply from the department on this. I do know, Chair, and I'm speaking under correction, it could perhaps be due to this Wi-Fi broadband rollout. That's perhaps at the libraries as well, perhaps that, but I'm speaking under correction. I will ask the department to give us a report on that, Chair.
Thank you very much, honorable members. Just before we may depart, honorable members, we seem to have done very well on time, especially on this department. I don't know whether maybe it's a small department, but sometimes I would just like to urge members, we seem to also like to spend a lot of time when we have the session with the Auditor General and Audit Committee. But I regard that session just as a session of getting points of clarity from them, actually, rather than us trying to interact and interrogate them. They are just preparing us, but in the past, I've seen us wasting a lot of time on that. But also, secondly, what I want to urge is a pity Honorable Mare is not here. I regard the Auditor General as our partners in this. And maybe if there's anything that maybe we are not clear about, let's use those sessions for purposes of actually finding out more information for them in the form of them actually advising us rather than just sometimes unnecessarily attacking them. But I don't want to dwell that much on that matter because Honorable Mare is actually not here, but I thought that maybe we'll have been here so that we can. I don't have a problem in members engaging robustly actually and rigorously engaging everybody, but I think sometimes we must just have a way of how we can actually deal with them, especially an entity like the Auditor General that I regard as actually our partners rather than actually our opposition in this drive of wanting to hold the departments and even the executive accountable. If there is no further comments, members, this has actually come to the end of the meeting, and our next meeting is going to start in 10 minutes time, which is make us having enough time to actually go and prepare for coffee. The meeting is closed.
Sorry, Chair.
Yes.
Our next meeting with the Department of Community Safety and Western Cape Liquor Authority starts at 11:30, Chair.
At 11, oh, not 11.
Yeah. No, at 11:30, Chair, but I'll be logging in at about 11:10 to open the meeting for everyone.
Excellent. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, colleagues.